The coffee mug in my hand almost slipped from my fingers. The ceramic was still warm, steam rising in lazy spirals, but my grip had gone completely numb. Across the conference table, the new vice president leaned back in his leather chair, with the kind of casual arrogance that comes from never having faced real consequences in his life. "You are dead weight here," he said, his voice carrying that smooth, practiced tone of someone who had delivered this speech dozens of times. "Your division is being liquidated, effective immediately. Pack your things and be out by the end of the day." The office lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the polished wood table. Someone coughed nervously near the doorway. 3 other members of my engineering team sat frozen in their chairs next to me, their faces draining of color as they processed what this sudden announcement meant for their lives. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at him, this man named Stuart Montgomery, who had been systematically dismantling our company divisions for 6 months. I was doing some rapid calculations in my head. 48 hours ago, I had signed the final paperwork in a quiet conference room downtown. 48 hours ago, I had purchased $21 million in active bank debt that this company owed to Summit Trust Bank. The ink on the assignment contracts was barely dry, and Stuart Montgomery had absolutely no idea what was coming. My name is Julian Vance, and until this exact moment, I was the Director of Advanced Development for the Sensor Technologies Division at AeroVortex Industries. I had spent 14 years building that division from a speculative research project into a $32 million revenue stream. My background was not what anyone would call privileged. I had worked my way through community college while taking care of my younger sister, Olivia Vance, after our mother passed away. Those difficult years taught me to see people, to understand when someone was struggling, and to recognize when talent was being ignored. That empathy had built my division. Every engineer I hired had a unique story, and every patent we developed came from creating an environment where people felt valued enough to take real risks. Now, this consultant, whose arrival 6 months ago had marked the beginning of the decline, was erasing all of that history with the stroke of a pen. To understand how we arrived at this boardroom showdown, you have to go back 9 months. The rumors of restructuring at AeroVortex Industries had started circulating in early winter. The board of directors had pushed out our founding chief executive officer, Gavin Fletcher, who had always supported long-term research. New leadership brought new priorities, and that usually meant casualties. Our division was performing exceptionally well, having just secured 2 major supply agreements with commercial aviation companies, so I foolishly assumed we were safe. The new chief executive officer, Preston Haddon, arrived in September, bringing a cold private equity mindset. Haddon saw a company not as a group of talented people, but as a collection of assets to be trimmed and flipped for short-term profit. I scheduled a meeting with him during his second week to present our performance metrics and growth projections. The meeting lasted exactly 8 minutes. Haddon sat behind his massive desk, barely glancing at the reports I had spent a week preparing. "Julian," he had said, interrupting me mid-sentence, "I appreciate your dedication, but AeroVortex is a thermal solutions company. That is our core brand. These specialty divisions, sensors and microfluidics, are distractions." I pointed out that we generated $32 million in revenue the previous year, but he simply dismissed it, noting the high operational costs of our specialized laboratory equipment. I left his office with a heavy feeling in my chest. Over the next month, Haddon systematically closed the materials research group and sold the microfluidics lab to a competitor, laying off dozens of dedicated professionals. Then came the announcement of Stuart Montgomery as the new vice president of operations. Montgomery was in his early 40s, with sharp features and expensive suits. He had spent 15 years at a restructuring firm, which meant he specialized in cutting budgets and firing employees. During our first meeting, Montgomery gestured to a chair without looking up from his screen. "Julian Vance, Sensor Technologies," he read. 14 years with the company, Northwestern Business School. Net contribution of $7,200,000 before overhead allocation. "Tell me why your division should continue to exist." I gave him our strategic pitch, highlighting our patents and long-term contracts, but he listened with a polite, empty smile. Strategic value is just corporate code for emotional attachment, he remarked. I have seen 100 divisions like yours, Julian. Good work is not the same as optimal resource allocation. I walked out knowing we were on borrowed time. Over the next 6 months, I watched him dismantle 3 more divisions, leaving a trail of empty desks and shattered careers. Each time, he followed the same pattern of gathering data, presenting a cost-benefit analysis to the board, and executing immediate layoffs. I knew we were next on his list, and I refused to let my team be destroyed without a fight. The turning point came on a Tuesday evening in late September, 6 months into the tenure of Stuart Montgomery. I was reviewing our quarterly projections when I received a secure email from Valerie Mercer, the Vice President of Supply Chain at Summit Aerospace Corporation, our largest client. Valerie wanted to schedule a private phone call to discuss supply continuity concerns. Reading between the lines, she had heard the corporate rumors about the restructuring at Aero Vortex and was worried about the future of their sensor deliveries. I sat back in my office chair and stared at the Chicago skyline for a long time, thinking about our options. If Montgomery liquidated our division, our aerospace clients would scramble to find alternative suppliers, which would take them months of requalification. Our engineers would scatter to competitors, taking their invaluable expertise with them. Our intellectual property would gather dust in a patent vault, and I would receive a standard severance package and a polite handshake. That was the conventional corporate outcome, but I wanted to find a different path. I pulled up the public financial statements of Aero Vortex Industries. The company debt structure was detailed in the footnotes. Aero Vortex had a $21 million revolving credit facility, issued 3 years ago by Summit Trust Bank, to finance their thermal division acquisition. The credit terms were standard, but they included strict covenants regarding debt-to-equity ratios and material changes in operational structure. Staring at those numbers, I realized something important. What if we could purchase that debt? The idea seemed wild, but corporate debt does not always trade at its face value. It trades based on the perceived risk of the borrowing company, and Aero Vortex was looking increasingly unstable under Preston Haddon's leadership. More importantly, owning that debt would give us structural legal leverage that existed completely outside the corporate hierarchy. Stuart Montgomery was operating on the assumption that employees had no power. He could fire us because the corporate ladder protected him, but creditors had legal rights that survived any termination. If I could become a creditor, I could change my position from a helpless employee to a major stakeholder. I spent the night running financial scenarios and making lists of contacts. The next morning, I met Nicholas Pierce for breakfast at a quiet diner near the Loop. Nicholas was a commercial banker I had known for years. Over coffee, I explained our situation and the debt structure I had identified. I want to acquire that credit line, I told him. Not to destroy the company, but to protect our division. Nicholas set his coffee down slowly, his face serious. Julian, you were talking about millions of dollars. Immense legal complexity and precise timing. But Summit Trust holds that note, and given the instability under Haddon, they might be glad to sell it at a discount. Perhaps 88 cents on the dollar, just to clear it off their books. If Haddon finds out before you close, they will block the transaction or accelerate their restructuring timeline. You have to do this in absolute secrecy. I suggested bringing in our major clients as co-investors, along with a few private equity firms that specialized in corporate carve-outs. Nicholas nodded slowly, realizing the scope of the plan. You are not just trying to save your job, he said. You are building a coalition to take the division independent. We spent the next 2 weeks structuring the transaction. We established a special purpose vehicle, a Delaware limited liability company called Vanguard Partners LLC, designed solely to acquire the debt. Then, I began making discreet phone calls to potential investors who had a vested interest in our survival. My first meeting was with Valerie Mercer at Summit Aerospace. We met at a quiet hotel lounge near the airport. I explained the systematic liquidations and the threat to their supply chain. I am assembling an investment group to purchase the bank debt, I told Valerie. If we own that loan, we can prevent the liquidation of the sensor division, or at least ensure a smooth transition of the operations. Valerie understood the stakes immediately. Requalifying a new supplier would cost them millions and cause months of production delays. 3 days later, Summit Aerospace committed $3,600,000 to our group. Next, I contacted Isaac Drummond, a partner at Stonebridge Capital, a private equity firm that specialized in mid-market spin-offs. Isaac was enthusiastic. "This is a classic carve-out opportunity," he said. "A profitable business trapped inside an unstable parent company that does not value its potential. If you can secure the leverage, we will invest $4,800,000. I also secured commitments from two retired electronics executives who contributed $2,400,000 each. For the final piece, I committed $5,200,000, representing my life savings, my retirement accounts, and a significant loan against my house. It was a massive gamble, but it was the only way to protect what we had built." By early November, Vanguard Partners LLC was fully funded and ready to make its move. On November 14th, exactly 8 months and 2 weeks after Stuart Montgomery arrived at AeroVortex Industries, I signed the final purchase agreement at the downtown offices of Summit Trust Bank. Vanguard Partners LLC acquired the $21 million credit facility for $18,500,000 in cash. The transaction was recorded in the banking databases, but it remained buried in the daily noise of corporate debt transfers. I was betting that Haddon and Montgomery would not notice the change in ownership until they attempted to execute their next round of cuts. They were too focused on their internal spreadsheets to look at the creditor registries. 2 days after the transaction closed, I received the meeting invitation from Montgomery's assistant. The subject line was brief: Divisional Integration Review, scheduled for Thursday morning. I knew exactly what that meant. The confrontation was finally here. Thursday morning was cold and rainy. The rain lashed against the high windows of our Chicago office building, casting a gray, somber mood over the entire floor. I arrived at the office early, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and sat at my desk, reviewing the legal documents one last time. Everything was aligned: the credit agreement, the change of control clauses, and the investor covenants. I could hear the quiet murmur of the early office workers beginning to arrive, completely unaware of the structural earthquake about to hit our department. At 9 o'clock, I walked into the main conference room, accompanied by my key team members, including Clara Jenkins, our senior design engineer, and Sean Brady, our manufacturing director. I had told them to remain completely calm, no matter what they heard. Stuart Montgomery was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by 2 junior analysts who had assisted him in previous layoffs. He did not stand to greet us, nor did he offer any polite introduction. "Let us keep this brief," Montgomery said, clicking his presentation slide. "I have completed the operational review of Sensor Technologies. The data shows that the division requires a disproportionate amount of capital relative to its contribution to our thermal brand identity. Your specialized facility footprint is underutilized by 28%, and the personnel costs are significantly above market rates. The concentration of revenue with a single aerospace client presents an unacceptable risk." Clara Jenkins tried to speak up. "Mr. Montgomery, if I may explain our client diversification plan for the next year, we are already in discussions with 2 medical device manufacturers who want to license our technology." Clara held up a folder containing the draft agreements, but Montgomery raised his hand dismissively, barely looking at the document. "The analysis is complete, and the decision has been made," Montgomery said. "Sensor Technologies is being liquidated, effective immediately. You will receive standard severance packages, and Human Resources will contact you regarding the transition timeline. I want everyone out of the building by noon today." The room went silent. The analysts looked down at their laptops, refusing to make eye contact. Sean Brady sat with his fists clenched, his face turning red with anger. Clara looked at me, her eyes filled with shock and tears. Montgomery looked directly at me, his expression cold and arrogant. "You are dead weight here, Julian," he said. I let the silence stretch for several seconds, watching him. I did not raise my voice. I did not show any anger. I simply stood up and adjusted my jacket. "Understood," I replied quietly. "I need to make a few phone calls to coordinate the transition. I will use the small office down the hall." Montgomery waved his hand. "Make it quick." Security will be here shortly to assist with the building exit. I walked down the hall to my office, shut the door, and dialed Nicholas Pierce. It is done, I said. Trigger phase 2. Nicholas did not hesitate. I am sending the formal notices to the executive suite now, he replied. Good luck, Julian. The notification Nicholas sent was a formal legal demand from Vanguard Partners LLC to Preston Haddon and the board of directors. As the holder of the $21 million credit facility, Vanguard Partners was declaring a technical default and invoking the acceleration clause under Section 8.4 of the credit agreement. The grounds were clear. The company had engaged in a material change of corporate structure and asset disposal without creditor approval and had violated federal labor regulations by failing to provide 60 days' notice under the Warren Act, 29 United States Code Section 2101 for the termination of 58 employees. Because of these material defaults, Vanguard Partners was demanding immediate repayment of the entire $21 million within 30 days. If the company failed to pay, we would initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings against all their corporate assets. 10 minutes after the legal notice was delivered to the executive suite, the peace of our floor was shattered. Gideon Barlow, the chief accountant, was running down the hallway toward Montgomery's office. His face was completely white, and his tie was crooked. He was clutching a stack of papers and breathing heavily, looking like a man who had just survived a shipwreck. He pushed open Montgomery's door without knocking, his voice cracking as he spoke. "We have a severe problem," he gasped. Through the glass office walls, I watched the immediate shift in dynamics. Montgomery's polished confidence vanished in an instant. He stood up, staring at the documents Gideon was shaking in his hands. One of the analysts began typing frantically on his laptop, while the other picked up the phone. 3 minutes later, Preston Haddon arrived, walking with a fast, angry stride. He entered Montgomery's office, slammed the door, and pulled the window blinds shut, cutting off the view from the hallway. I returned to our workspace where my team was standing around in quiet confusion. Several junior engineers were holding cardboard boxes they had found in the copy room, their hands shaking as they packed their personal notebooks. "What is going on over there?" Sean Brady asked, pointing toward the executive offices. "They look like they are in the middle of a major crisis. They are just learning about the true cost of their restructuring plan," I said. "Take your time packing, Sean. I do not think anyone will be escorted from the building today." Clara Jenkins looked at me, a sudden realization appearing in her eyes. "Julian, did you do something?" Before I could answer, my desk phone rang. It was Haddon's executive assistant, her voice tight with tension. "Mr. Vance, the chief executive officer needs to see you in the boardroom immediately." I walked up to the executive floor and entered the boardroom. 5 people were waiting for me around the massive mahogany table. Preston Haddon sat at the head, his expression dark with anger. Stuart Montgomery sat next to him, looking disheveled and pale. Gideon Barlow was reviewing spreadsheets, while Diana Albright, the general counsel, and Quentin Miller, the outside legal counsel, stood near the window. Haddon did not waste time with greetings. "Julian, sit down," he ordered, slamming his fist on the table. 2 days ago, our primary bank loan was purchased by an entity called Vanguard Partners LLC. This morning, that group declared a default based on our restructuring actions and is demanding immediate repayment of $21 million. Gideon tells me we do not have that amount of cash available. "Do you know anything about this?" I sat down, folded my hands, and looked him in the eye. "I am a managing member of Vanguard Partners," I said calmly, "along with several of our major aerospace clients and investment partners who want to ensure the survival of the Sensor Technologies division." Montgomery leaned forward, his face flushed with rage. "You bought our debt? That is a clear conflict of interest. It is tortious interference. You cannot do this, and we will sue you for every dollar you have." Quentin Miller, the outside counsel, raised his hand to quiet him. "Actually, Stuart, Julian was terminated this morning by your order. As of 9 o'clock, he was no longer an employee of this company. He is a creditor holding a valid note on behalf of Vanguard Partners. There is no conflict of interest because you ended his employment before the notice was served." Haddon turned to Montgomery, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that made the analysts shrink in their seats. You terminated him this morning before verifying the creditor registry? I had no reason to believe. Montgomery stammered, his hands shaking. The registry is updated weekly. How could I have known he would pull something like this? Diana Albright, the general counsel, stepped forward and adjusted her glasses. Julian is correct, Preston. By terminating the entire division of 58 employees with zero notice, we also triggered immediate liability under the Federal Warning Act. We face statutory penalties of $100 per day per worker, plus full back pay and benefits. That is an unbudgeted liability of over $1 million, and it provides Vanguard partners with clear regulatory grounds to declare a material covenant default under the loan agreement. Our position is legally indefensible. Haddon closed his eyes, taking a deep breath to control his anger. He then turned back to me. Julian, what are your terms? We cannot repay $21 million in 30 days without forcing the company into receivership. What do you actually want? I opened my folder and placed 3 documents on the table. I want 3 specific conditions met before we discuss restructuring the payment timeline, I said. First, the Sensor Technologies division is not liquidated. It remains fully operational with all current staff intact. Haddon began to object, citing the operational costs, but I cut him off. The analysis you relied on was completely flawed, Haddon. We hold 34 active patents, and our clients rely on us. If you liquidate us, Summit Aerospace will terminate their other contracts with Aero Vortex, which will cost you far more than any temporary savings. Gideon Barlow nodded slowly, confirming my statement to the board. He is right, Preston. Summit Aerospace represents 40% of our thermal division revenue. If they pull out their custom orders, the entire company will collapse. We will breach our remaining commercial covenants and face involuntary bankruptcy within 45 days. Haddon looked at Montgomery, who sat silent and defeated. What is your second condition? Haddon asked. Operational autonomy, I replied. Sensor Technologies will become a wholly owned subsidiary of Aero Vortex, operating under the name Aero Vortex Sensor Technologies. We will have our own budget, our own hiring authority, and direct control over our strategic direction. We will pay a reasonable overhead allocation to the parent company, but you will no longer have the authority to optimize us out of existence. We will also establish a new board of directors for the subsidiary, including representatives from Summit Aerospace and Vanguard partners, ensuring our strategic decisions remain protected. And the third condition? Diana Albright asked, making notes on her tablet. Every employee terminated this morning is reinstated immediately with full back pay and benefits, I said. I want the Human Resources Director to halt the processing of termination packages immediately, and Stuart Montgomery will have no operational authority or oversight over our subsidiary or its personnel. Montgomery stood up, his chair scraping loudly. This is outrageous. You cannot dictate executive roles. I am negotiating with Haddon and the board. Not you, I said, looking away from him. You created a $21 million crisis because you refused to understand the value of the people who actually build the products. Your presence is a liability to this company. Haddon was quiet for a long minute, looking at the documents. If we agree to these terms, how will Vanguard partners handle the debt? We will restructure the $21 million into a 5-year note at 6% interest, I explained. That will give Aero Vortex the breathing room to stabilize its finances while protecting our investors. Once our division hits the growth targets I have projected, we will be in a position to discuss an early buyout or repayment. Quentin Miller reviewed the proposed terms on his tablet. This is a viable path forward, Preston, he advised. It prevents receivership, maintains our relationship with Summit Aerospace, and resolves the Warning Act exposure. The formal agreement took 3 weeks of intense legal drafting to finalize. In the end, Haddon signed the restructuring documents. The Sensor Technologies division became an independent subsidiary, and I was named its president. Every engineer and technician returned to their desk, and we celebrated with a quiet lunch in our workshop. Stuart Montgomery lasted only 4 weeks at Aero Vortex. Haddon stripped him of all meaningful operational authority, moving his office to a small basement cubicle, and he quietly resigned to pursue other opportunities. Sometimes, The most effective revenge is not a loud confrontation, but simply continuing to succeed while your detractors fade into irrelevance. Over the next 3 years, Aero Vortex sensor technologies exceeded every projection we had made to our investors. We expanded our aerospace contracts, developed new sensor applications for medical devices, and hired 45 new employees. Clara Jenkins was promoted to Vice President of Engineering, and Sean Brady took over our advanced manufacturing facility, introducing processes that improved our operational margins by 18%. We hired a brilliant young engineer named Jeffrey Cole, who developed a next-generation high-temperature pressure sensor, using silicon carbide substrates that became a gold standard in the aerospace industry. Vanguard Partners LLC was dissolved after the debt was repaid in full, 18 months ahead of schedule. The investment had generated consistent returns for all our partners, and Valerie Mercer remained on our advisory board. Preston Haddon called me the day the final loan payment cleared. "Julian, I want to apologize," he said. "When I took over, I was too focused on cost reduction. I almost destroyed the most valuable part of this company because I did not understand the technology or the people. You taught me a lesson I will not forget." "Thank you, Preston," I replied. "I am glad we could build something that works for everyone." Today, 5 years after that rainy Thursday morning when I almost dropped my coffee mug, our subsidiary is preparing for an initial public offering. We are now an $82 million business with over 200 employees. That old ceramic mug with the fading Aero Vortex logo still sits on my desk. It is a daily reminder of the moment when I refused to accept that we were dead weight and instead chose to stand up and protect the people who made our success possible. The corporate world often treats people as disposable numbers on a balance sheet, but true value will always lie in the dedication, knowledge, and creativity of a team that believes in what they are building. I am grateful that we had the courage to fight back and prove that the heart of a business can never be optimized away. When leaders focus solely on short-term optimization at the expense of human capital, they make a strategic mistake because the people are the company. By defending our team, we saved 58 jobs, created hundreds of new careers, and built an organization that continues to innovate and succeed. That is the ultimate proof that empathy and long-term vision can win over spreadsheets and arrogance.